My name is Lena Pearson, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life as a nurse, tending to the sick and injured. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for the midnight call that shattered the peaceful silence of our empty nest. The shrill ring of the phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing. "Hello," I whispered, careful not to wake Marcus. "Mom, it's Carter." My son's voice, absent for so long, sent a chill down my spine. "Carter? What's wrong?" "It's the middle of the night. We've hit hard times, Mom. We're coming home." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I sat up, fully alert now. "What do you mean, coming home?" "Carter, where are you?" "We're about an hour out. Lila and the kids are with me. We need a place to stay." I could hear the familiar manipulative tone creeping into his voice, the same one he'd used countless times during his tumultuous teenage years. My stomach churned with a mix of concern and dread. "Carter, you can't just show up like this. We need to talk about Dash." "Mom, please. We have nowhere else to go. You wouldn't turn away your own grandchildren, would you?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Of course, he knew exactly which buttons to push. "All right," I conceded, my voice tight. "We'll talk when you get here." I hung up and turned to find Marcus awake, concern etched on his face. "What's going on?" "Carter's coming home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "With Lila and the kids. They say they've hit hard times." Marcus sat up, running a hand through his thinning hair. "After all this time? Lena, we can't just dash." "I know." I cut him off, climbing out of bed. "But what choice do we have? They'll be here in an hour." As we hurried to prepare the guest room, memories of Carter's troubled past flooded back. The lies, the manipulation, the constant drama that had dominated our lives for so long. We'd finally found peace in our empty nest, looking forward to quiet evenings and leisurely mornings. Now, it felt like we were being thrown back into the eye of the storm. An hour later, headlights swept across our living room window. Marcus and I exchanged a look before opening the front door. There they stood, Carter, Lila, and 4 bleary-eyed children, surrounded by suitcases and boxes. "Mom, Dad," Carter said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thanks for taking us in." I hugged him stiffly, noting the designer watch on his wrist that seemed at odds with his claims of financial hardship. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in, all of you." As they filed past us, Lila barely meeting our eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being played once again. The amount of luggage they'd brought suggested this wasn't a short-term visit. "We've set up the guest room," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "It'll be a tight fit, but Dash." "Oh, we can't all squeeze in there," Lila interrupted, speaking for the first time. "Carter and I will take the master bedroom. You two don't mind the guest room, do you?" I felt Marcus stiffen beside me. "Actually, we do mind," I said firmly. "This is still our home, Lila. You'll make do with the guest room for now." Carter stepped in, ever the mediator. "Come on, Mom. We've had a long drive. Can't we sort this out in the morning?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the same manipulative teenager who had caused us so much grief. But now, he was a grown man with his own family, still expecting us to bend to his will. As I helped settle the children into makeshift beds, a resolve began to form in my mind. This time would be different. This time, Carter and Lila would learn that actions have consequences and that our love didn't mean we were pushovers. Little did they know, their arrival had set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. The next morning, I awoke to the cacophony of unfamiliar voices and the pitter-patter of small feet. For a moment, I forgot about our unexpected guests. Reality crashed back as I entered the kitchen to find Lila rummaging through our pantry. "Morning, Lena," she said, not bothering to turn around. "You're out of cereal. The kids are starving." I bit back a retort. "Good morning, Lila. I wasn't expecting to feed 6 extra people today. I'll go to the store later." Carter sauntered in, looking fresh despite the late-night arrival. "Morning, Mom. Dad around? I need to borrow the car." "Your father's at work," I replied, eyeing him suspiciously. "Why do you need the car?" He shrugged. "Just want to check out the old neighborhood, you know? See what's changed." I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. "What about looking for work? I thought you said you'd hit hard times." Carter's easy smile faltered for a moment. "Come on, Mom. We just got here. Give us a chance to settle in, will you?" Before I could respond, the oldest of the children, 10-year-old Mia, came running in. "Grandma, can we go to the park?" I looked at Lila, expecting her to take charge, but she was busy scrolling through her phone. With a sigh, I nodded. "Sure, sweetie. Let me get dressed and we'll go." As I herded the children to the park, leaving Carter and Lila behind, I couldn't help but feel a mix of joy at spending time with my grandchildren and frustration at their parents' apparent lack of responsibility. When we returned, I found Marcus home early, his face tight with barely concealed anger. "Lena, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, leading me to our bedroom. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. I came home to find Carter and Lila lounging by the pool, drinking our good wine. When I asked about job hunting, Carter laughed it off, saying they were taking a mental health day. "Lena, how long are we going to let this go on?" I sat heavily on the bed. "I don't know, Marcus. I don't want to turn them away, but they're taking advantage of us," he finished. "We need to set some ground rules." We agreed to talk to Carter and Lila that evening, but when dinner time came, they were nowhere to be found. A hastily scribbled note on the counter read, "Went out with some old friends. Don't wait up." As Marcus and I sat at the dinner table with our grandchildren, the tension was palpable. "Where's Mommy and Daddy?" little Emma asked, her bottom lip quivering. "They'll be back later, sweetheart," I assured her, even as anger bubbled inside me. "Let's enjoy our dinner, shall we?" Later that night, as Marcus and I lay in bed, unable to sleep, we heard Carter and Lila stumble in, giggling and shushing each other like teenagers. "Tomorrow," Marcus whispered, squeezing my hand. "We'll talk to them tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and the next day and the next. Each time we tried to broach the subject of their plans or contributions, Carter and Lila found ways to deflect or change the subject. They settled into our home as if it were their own, showing little regard for our routines or privacy. A week into their stay, I found myself standing in the doorway of our guest room, now a chaotic mess of toys, clothes, and suitcases, watching Lila paint her nails while Carter napped in the middle of the day. The sight of them, so carefree and unbothered, ignited something in me. I realized then that our kindness was being mistaken for weakness. The time for gentle prodding was over. If Carter and Lila wouldn't take responsibility for their lives, then Marcus and I would have to force their hand. As I closed the door quietly, leaving them to their idleness, I made a silent vow. This situation would change, and soon. Little did Carter and Lila know, their comfortable freeloading days were numbered. 2 weeks into Carter and Lila's stay, I reached my breaking point. I'd been covering extra shifts at the hospital to offset the increased expenses, and I was exhausted. Walking into our living room after a grueling 12-hour shift, I found Carter and Lila sprawled on the couch, surrounded by takeout containers. "Hey, Mom," Carter said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Can you grab us some beers from the fridge?" Something inside me snapped. "No, Carter, I can't," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "What I can do is ask when you plan on looking for a job." Lila rolled her eyes. "We told you, we're going through a rough patch. We need time to dash." "To what?" I interrupted. "To drain our retirement savings? To teach your children that it's okay to mooch off others." Carter sat up, his face darkening. "Come on, Mom. That's not fair. We're family." "Family doesn't take advantage of each other," I shot back. "You said you hit hard times, but I haven't seen either of you lift a finger to improve your situation." Just then, Marcus walked in, his face grim. "Lena, we need to talk." In private. In our bedroom, Marcus showed me a bank statement he'd found while cleaning. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of large deposits. "They have money, Lena. A lot of it." My hands shook as I scanned the document. The numbers didn't lie. Carter and Lila had substantial savings. They lied to us, I whispered, feeling a mixture of hurt and fury. Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. It's time we confront them. We marched back to the living room, where Carter and Lila were now arguing in hushed tones. They fell silent as we entered. We know about the money, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. You lied about being in financial trouble. Carter's face paled. Mom, Dad, I can explain dash. Save it, Marcus cut in. We want the truth, and we want it now. Under our unwavering gaze, Carter and Lila's facade crumbled. They admitted they weren't broke at all. They'd simply grown tired of the responsibilities of maintaining their own home and paying bills. We thought it would be easier to live here, Lila said, not meeting our eyes. We didn't think it would be such a big deal. I felt a surge of disappointment, so profound it nearly knocked me off my feet. Not a big deal? I repeated, incredulous. You've disrupted our lives, taken advantage of our kindness, and set a terrible example for your children. How is that not a big deal? Carter tried to placate us. Look, we're sorry. We'll start contributing, okay? We'll pay rent, buy groceries dash. No, I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. This isn't about money anymore. This is about respect, responsibility, and honesty, all of which you've shown a complete lack of. Marcus stepped forward, his expression resolute. We want you out. Not today, not this minute, but soon. You have 2 weeks to find your own place and move out. The shock on Carter and Lila's faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. They sputtered protests and excuses, but Marcus and I stood firm. As they retreated to the guest room, presumably to discuss their options, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It hurt to be so stern with our son, but I knew it was necessary. That night, as Marcus and I lay in bed, I turned to him. Are we doing the right thing? I asked, doubt creeping in. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. We are, he assured me. They need to learn to stand on their own feet. We're not just doing this for us, we're doing it for them, and for our grandchildren. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Carter and Lila had brought this on themselves, but I was determined to turn this into a learning experience for all of us. Little did they know, their real challenge was just beginning. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up early, my mind racing with plans. Marcus was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. I've been thinking, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. We need to do more than just kick them out. We need to teach them a lesson. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I laid out my plan, watching his expression shift from skepticism to understanding, and finally to agreement. By the time Carter and Lila stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and subdued, we were ready. Good morning, I said, my voice carefully neutral. We need to talk about your living situation. Carter tensed visibly. Mom, Dad, about last night dash. Save it, Marcus interrupted. We've made a decision. We're downsizing. The shock on their faces was palpable. Lila found her voice first. Downsizing? What do you mean? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance of a lifetime. We've realized that maintaining this house is too much for us. The expenses, the upkeep, it's draining our retirement savings. We're going to sell and move into a smaller place. Carter's eyes narrowed suspiciously. But what about us? Where are we supposed to go? That's not our problem, Marcus said firmly. You're adults with your own resources. It's time you found your own place. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We made a show of contacting real estate agents, discussing potential neighborhoods, and packing up non-essential items. Carter and Lila watched these proceedings with growing panic. Their previous nonchalance replaced by frantic whispered conversations and furtive phone calls. Behind the scenes, I was setting other wheels in motion. I reached out to an old nursing colleague, now an HR manager at a local company. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, I was wondering if you had any job openings that might suit Carter's skills? Sarah, bless her, didn't ask questions. Within days, she'd arranged an interview for Carter. Now came the tricky part, ensuring he'd actually go. I casually mentioned the opportunity over dinner one night. "Oh, Carter, I forgot to tell you. My friend Sarah said her company is hiring. I took the liberty of sending over your resume, and they'd like to interview you next week." Carter nearly choked on his food.
Mom.
"You can't just dash." "Can't just what?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Help my son find employment when he clearly needs it? Unless, of course, you have other prospects lined up?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Carter grudgingly agreed to the interview, while Lila sulked beside him. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Carter and Lila's bickering increased, their united front crumbling under the strain of impending responsibility. I overheard snippets of their arguments, complaints about job searching, worries about affording rent, debates about asking friends for help. Through it all, Marcus and I maintained our facade of downsizing preparations. We scheduled viewings of smaller homes, making sure Carter and Lila overheard our discussions about reduced square footage and single bathrooms. The night before Carter's interview, I found him sitting alone on the back porch, staring into the darkness. For a moment, I saw the vulnerable boy he'd once been, and my heart ached. "You know," I said softly, sitting beside him, "your father, and I only want what's best for you and your family." Carter nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I know, Mom. I don't know if I can do this." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can, Carter. You're stronger than you think. But you have to want it for yourself, not just because we're pushing you." As I headed back inside, leaving Carter to his thoughts, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. Our plan was in motion, but would it be enough to shake Carter and Lila out of their complacency? Only time would tell. Little did they know, the real test was yet to come. The next phase of our plan would push them to their limits, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions head-on. The day after Carter's job interview, tension in the house reached a fever pitch. I deliberately avoided asking about it, waiting for him to volunteer the information. When he didn't, I knew things hadn't gone well. That evening, Marcus and I called a family meeting. Carter and Lila sat on the couch, their postures defensive, while we stood before them. "We've found a new place," Marcus announced without preamble. "We're moving out next week." The shock on their faces was almost comical. Lila was the first to recover. But what about us? Where are we supposed to go?" I steeled myself, knowing this was the moment of truth. "You have 3 options," I said, my voice firm. 1, you find your own place immediately. 2, you stay here and pay market rate rent. Or 3, you leave and figure things out on your own. Carter leaped to his feet. "This is insane. You can't just abandon us like this." "Abandon you?" I repeated, incredulous. "Carter, you're adults with 4 children. It's time you took responsibility for your lives." The next few days were chaos. Carter and Lila alternated between frantic apartment hunting and trying to guilt us into changing our minds. I overheard heated arguments between them, accusations flying about whose fault this was. Meanwhile, Marcus and I proceeded with our move. We packed boxes, rented a moving truck, and made a show of saying goodbye to neighbors. The children, caught in the middle of all this, were confused and upset. The night before our planned departure, I found 10-year-old Mia crying in the backyard. My heart ached as I sat beside her. "Grandma," she sniffled, "why do you have to leave? Don't you love us anymore?" I pulled her close, fighting back my own tears. "Oh, sweetheart, of course we love you. Sometimes, loving someone means doing what's best for them, even if it's hard." As I comforted Mia, I overheard Carter and Lila arguing in hushed tones nearby. "We can't afford anything decent on such short notice," Lila hissed. "Maybe we should just go back home." "And admit defeat?" Carter snapped back.
"No way."
"We'll figure something out." The next morning, moving day arrived. As we loaded the last of our boxes into the truck, Carter approached us, looking defeated. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice strained, "we've found a place. It's not great, but it'll do for now. We're moving out tomorrow." I nodded, careful not to show my relief. "That's good, Carter. I hope this helps you get back on your feet. As we drove away, leaving Carter, Lila, and the kids standing in the driveway, I felt a mixture of guilt and determination. We weren't really moving, of course. We'd rented a small apartment across town as a temporary base, somewhere to retreat to while Carter and Lila faced the consequences of their actions. For the next week, we maintained radio silence, ignoring their calls and messages. It was harder than I'd anticipated, especially knowing our grandchildren were caught in the middle of this. Finally, after 7 days, we returned to the house. The sight that greeted us was sobering. The once immaculate lawn was overgrown, and through the windows, we could see piles of dishes in the sink and toys strewn across the floor. Carter answered the door, looking haggard and unkempt. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" "We came to check on the house," Marcus said evenly. "And on you." As we stepped inside, the full extent of the chaos became apparent. Lila was attempting to corral the younger children, while Mia sat in a corner, headphones on, ignoring the mayhem around her. Carter ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look, I know this looks bad, but we're figuring it out. I've got a lead on a job, and Lila's looking into part-time work." I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral. "That's good to hear, Carter. But it looks like you could use some help getting organized." As I rolled up my sleeves, preparing to tackle the mess, I knew we were at a crossroads. The easy thing would be to step in and fix everything. But the right thing, the thing that would truly help Carter and Lila in the long run, would be to guide them towards solving their own problems. The real test was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through, no matter how difficult it might be. Over the next few weeks, I watched Carter and Lila struggle to adjust to their new reality. Carter had managed to secure the job at my friend Sarah's company, but it was clear he was floundering. Every evening, he'd return home looking more defeated than the day before. One particularly rough day, I overheard him on the phone in the backyard, his voice strained. "I don't know if I can do this, Sarah. I'm not cut out for this kind of work." My heart ached, but I resisted the urge to intervene. This was a battle Carter needed to fight on his own. Meanwhile, Lila had reluctantly started job hunting. Her lack of work experience made it challenging, and her frustration was palpable. I caught her snapping at the children more frequently, her patience wearing thin under the pressure. One afternoon, I arrived to find Lila in tears at the kitchen table, a pile of rejected job applications in front of her. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "I have a degree. Why won't anyone hire me?" I sat beside her, offering a tissue. "It's been a while since you've worked, Lila. Maybe you need to start smaller, build up some recent experience." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Like what? Flipping burgers?" "If that's what it takes," I replied gently. "There's no shame in honest work." The children, surprisingly, seemed to be adapting better than their parents. Mia had taken on more responsibility, helping with her younger siblings and even starting to pack lunches. The younger ones had settled into a routine, finding comfort in the stability of school and after-school activities. One evening, I arrived to babysit and found Mia in the kitchen, carefully making sandwiches for the next day. "Grandma," she said, not looking up from her task, "are Mom and Dad going to be okay?" I hugged her tightly, marveling at her maturity. "They're trying their best, sweetheart. Sometimes growing up is hard for adults too." As the weeks wore on, the strain began to show in Carter and Lila's relationship. Their arguments became more frequent and heated, often about money or household responsibilities. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I overheard them in the living room. "I can't do this anymore, Carter." Lila's voice was shrill with frustration. "You're never home, and when you are, you're too exhausted to help with anything. I'm drowning here." "What do you want from me, Lila?" Carter shot back. "I'm busting my ass at a job I hate to keep a roof over our heads. What more can I do?" "Figure it out." Lila snapped. "That's what adults do, right? Isn't that what your parents keep telling us?" The silence that followed was deafening. I slipped out quietly, my heart heavy. The next day, Carter called in sick to work. I found him sitting on the front porch, staring blankly into space. "I'm failing, Mom," he said as I sat beside him. "At work, at home. I'm letting everyone down." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Carter, nobody succeeds overnight. What matters is that you're trying. That's more than you were doing before. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. I can't go back to how we were before. I won't. But I don't know how to move forward. One day at a time, I said, squeezing his hand. That's all any of us can do. As I left that evening, I saw Carter and Lila sitting together on the couch, talking quietly. For the first time in weeks, they weren't arguing. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. Driving home, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be tough, but maybe, just maybe, Carter and Lila were starting to find their footing. Little did I know, their greatest challenge was yet to come, and it would test the limits of everything they'd learned so far. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was just settling in with a cup of tea when my phone lit up with Carter's name. Mom, his voice cracked. We're being evicted. My heart sank, but I steeled myself. What happened, Carter? He broke down, explaining through sobs how they'd fallen behind on rent. They'd been using credit cards to cover expenses, thinking they'd catch up once Lila found steady work. But the debt had spiraled out of control, and now they were facing homelessness. Can you help us? He pleaded. Just this once. I swear we'll pay you back. I closed my eyes, fighting the instinct to rush to his rescue. Carter, I said softly, I can't bail you out of this. You need to figure it out on your own. His response was explosive. Figured out? We're about to be on the street with 4 kids. How can you be so heartless? As he ranted, I held the phone away from my ear, letting him vent. When he finally quieted, I spoke again. Carter, this is a learning experience. It's hard, but it's necessary. You have resources. Use them. I hung up, my hands shaking. Marcus found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. Was that Carter? He asked, concern etching his features. I nodded, filling him in on the situation. Did we do the right thing? I whispered, doubt creeping in. Marcus wrapped his arms around me. We did. They need to learn, Lena. It's the only way. The next few days were agonizing. We heard through the grapevine that Carter and Lila were scrambling to find a new place to live. Our phones buzzed constantly with messages from family and friends, some supportive, others critical of our tough love approach. One afternoon, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, at the grocery store. Lena, she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, I heard about Carter and Lila. How could you let this happen to your own grandchildren? I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. We're teaching them valuable life lessons, Margaret. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. Word of our stance spread through the community like wildfire. To my surprise, many rallied around us. Parents who had struggled with their own adult children reached out, sharing similar stories and offering support. Meanwhile, Carter and Lila faced their crisis head-on. Through mutual friends, we learned they'd managed to find a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. It was far from ideal, but it was a roof over their heads. One evening, about a week after the eviction notice, I received a text from Mia. Grandma, can I call you? My heart raced as I dialed her number. Mia, sweetheart, are you okay? We're okay, she said, her voice small but steady. It's hard, but I think Mom and Dad are trying really hard. Dad's working extra shifts, and Mom got a job at the diner down the street. Tears pricked my eyes as I listened to my granddaughter describe their new living situation. It was cramped and not in the best neighborhood, but they were making it work. Grandma, Mia continued, I know you and Grandpa are trying to help, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. I just wanted you to know. I understand. As I hung up, a mix of emotions washed over me. Pride in Mia's maturity, hope for Carter and Lila's growth, and a renewed determination to see this through. The next day, I ran into Carter at the supermarket. He looked exhausted, his cart filled with budget brands and sale items. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought he might turn away. But then he approached, his expression a mix of shame and resolve. Mom, he said, his voice rough, I think I get it now. What you and Dad were trying to do. It's hell, but We're learning. I reached out, squeezing his arm gently. You're doing great, Carter. Keep going. As he walked away, I felt a shift in the air. The storm wasn't over, but perhaps we were finally seeing the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. 6 months after the eviction, Marcus and I received an unexpected invitation. Carter and Lila wanted us to visit their new apartment for dinner. As we drove to their place, I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The apartment complex was modest but well-maintained. Carter greeted us at the door, looking more mature than I'd ever seen him. "Mom, Dad," he said, embracing us warmly. "Thanks for coming." Inside, the small space was tidy and organized. Lila was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled delicious. The children were setting the table, chattering excitedly. "Welcome," Lila said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's almost ready." As we sat down to eat, I noticed the changes in everyone. The children seemed more responsible, helping without being asked. Carter and Lila moved around each other with a newfound respect and teamwork. Over dinner, Carter cleared his throat. "Mom, Dad, we owe you an apology," he began. "And a thank you." Lila nodded, reaching for Carter's hand. "We were angry at first," she admitted. "We felt abandoned. But now we see what you were trying to do." Carter continued. "It's been hard, really hard. But we're making it work. I got a promotion at work, and Lila's been taking online classes to update her skills. We're saving money," Lila added. "Slowly but surely. We have a budget now, and we stick to it." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "We're so proud of you both," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Marcus nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. "You've come a long way." After dinner, as the children cleared the table, Carter pulled us aside. "We want you to know," he said softly, "that we understand now why you did what you did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." Lila joined us, her eyes shining. "We're teaching the kids about responsibility and the value of hard work. We don't want them to make the same mistakes we did." As we prepared to leave, Mia approached us. "Grandma, Grandpa," she said, hugging us tightly. "Thank you for helping Mom and Dad grow up." On the drive home, Marcus and I sat in comfortable silence, processing the evening. Finally, he spoke. "We did the right thing, Lena." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "We did. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." In the months that followed, we watched from a distance as Carter and Lila continued to grow. They faced challenges, of course, but they met them head-on, working together instead of looking for easy outs. One sunny afternoon, as Marcus and I sat on our porch enjoying our retirement, Carter called. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We did it. We saved enough for a down payment on a small house." I felt my heart swell with joy. "That's wonderful, Carter. I'm so proud of you." "We couldn't have done it without you and Dad," he said. "Your tough love. It saved us. Thank you." As I hung up, I turned to Marcus, tears in my eyes. "They're going to be okay," I said, my voice filled with relief and happiness. Marcus pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. "They are. And so are we." Looking out at the setting sun, I reflected on our journey. It had been a difficult road, filled with hard choices and painful moments. But in the end, love, real, honest, tough love, had prevailed. Carter and Lila had found their way, not because we rescued them, but because we gave them the space to rescue themselves. They had stumbled and fallen, but they had also learned to pick themselves up. As the sky turned a brilliant orange, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. We had all learned valuable lessons about responsibility, about the true meaning of family, and about the power of standing on your own 2 feet. Our retirement might not have started the way we planned, but it had led us to something far more valuable, a stronger, more resilient family. And as I sat there, hand in hand with Marcus, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, we would face them together, stronger for the storms we had weathered.